We turn that up.
Right. So good evening and welcome to the November 7th, 2022 City Council Special Meeting. I am Mayor Ross, and tonight's special meeting is brought to you live using video conferencing technology provided by Zoom. Tonight's recording will be posted on the city's YouTube channel. So thank you for joining us tonight. City Clerk Dean, would you please call the roll?
Councilmember Benson,
Here.
Councilmember Watton,
Here.
Councilmember Holloway, Councilmember Mayhew, Councilmember Lassay, Councilmember Christensen, here, Councilmember Johnson,
Here.
and Mayor Ross.
I am here. So I believe Councilmember Holloway and Councilmember Mayhew will be here shortly, and have not heard from Councilmember Lassay. Let's see. So is there a motion to excuse Councilmember Lassay this evening from tonight's meeting? Councilmember Johnson?
Just in case, for whatever reason they don't make it, I'll also move to excuse Councilmember Mayhew and Councilmember Holloway. They intend to be here, but just in case they don't. Okay. Oh,
I am not voting to excuse
Okay,
Lassay,
we
so
will-
they should be separated.
Please note, oh yeah, we have.
No, we got a good one online.
Please note, Councilmember Lassay has arrived. So it leaves Councilmember Holloway and Councilmember Pro Tem Mayhew.
Still move to excuse them just in case they don't make it for whatever reason.
Second.
Moved by Councilmember Johnson, second by Councilmember Watton to excuse both Councilmember Holloway and Mayor Pro Tem Mayhew. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed, nay. So they are excused, so we know that they are on their way. That moves us to the approval of the agenda. And we have one item on the agenda this evening. All those in favor or is there a motion to approve the agenda? Sorry.
So move.
Second.
Moved by Councilor Watton, second by Councilor Johnson to approve the special meeting agenda. Is there any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? All right. So we move on to our first agenda item, which is the AB 22-076, 2023 to 2024 biennial budget. This is an opportunity for council to continue to deliberate on the proposed biennial budget. And we'll first have an introduction by our budget manager, Drew Boutte, then a potential executive session, and then the rest of the meeting will be devoted to council discussion on the budget. With that, I will turn it over to our budget manager, Drew Boutte, for updates. 1 second, Councilor Lassay.
Did you say that council members Mayhew and Holloway are known to be on their way, or? I think I have.
I'm not excusing.
There's
Mayhew
one.
After all.
It would be,
There's
just looking at it from Councilmember Holloway perspective, is that he wasn't at the last meeting. It would be good to have him here for any sort of.
That is true. It was recorded, so he had an option to listen to it.
Move to take a short temporary recess for 5 minutes to give Councilmember Holloway a chance to arrive.
Second.
Moved by Councilor Lassay, second by Mayor Pro Tem Mayhew to take a short recess until one of the council members, Holloway, arrives. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Mayor,
Oh,
Councilmember
I'm sorry.
Christensen.
Councilmember Christensen.
I was just going to say again that I am going to have to regrettably hop off early this evening to catch a flight. So just wanted to remind folks of that.
Great, thank you.
Apologies.
Thank you. Any discussion? All
I'm
those
gonna
in
miss her.
favor, all those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed, nay? Was there a vote, Councilor Watton?
Nay.
Okay. So there's five approving and for Lawton against. And so I guess we will take a 5-minute recess or until Councilmember Holloway shows up. All right. Okay, so tonight's agenda item is the AB 22-076, 2023-2024 biennial budget. This opportunity for council to continue to deliberate on the proposed budget. And we will start with an introduction from our budget manager, Drew Boutet, for updates. And we could have then a potential executive session. And the rest of the meeting will be devoted to council discussion of the budget. So Drew Boutet.
All right, thank you, Mayor. And a good evening, council members. Thank you for having me here today. We're going to set the stage a little bit with this presentation, and then we're going to hopefully answer some of your questions from the November the 1st meeting. And then we're going to turn it back over to you, council, for deliberation on this budget. What we're trying to do in terms of setting the stage, get on to the next slide. Right. Escape from that. Technical difficulties a little bit here. Back into presentation mode. There we go. So with setting the stage, I'm using the analogy of an airplane. In essence, we're trying to land the budget in a time of intense financial strain. And so this is a very challenging situation that we all face today. There's elevated and persistent inflation. It's one of the greatest near-term risks to the US economy right now. As a consequence, the Fed has raised interest rates at the fastest pace in more than 4 decades to beat back inflation by slowing economic growth. There's been a debate out there between economists for probably a good 4 or 5 months now at this point about whether these rate increases will result in a soft landing or hard landing. The expectation now from a pretty substantial consensus is that we may see a hard landing with the economy moving forward. Consequently, the chances of a recession are now very high. There's been several news reports. You can find it in Forbes magazine, for example, the Wall Street Journal, where the probability of a recession is approaching nearly 100%. And what they're saying is that could potentially happen Q1, Q2 of 2023, if we're not already experiencing it right now, with potential layoffs happening Q2, Q3 of 2023. And as part of what we may see in the newspaper on a daily basis right now, you're seeing reports about tech companies freezing hiring, such as Amazon, or even certain places cutting positions and laying off people as well, or starting that process. One of the long-term worries for the US economy is that we're going to enter a period of stagflation. In essence, a period of high inflation coupled with higher than normal unemployment. Something that we haven't seen here since the 1970s, and it's a real risk potentially to the US economy moving forward. The US, not the US, say the Russian-Ukrainian war right now certainly have an impact on commodity prices, not only just grain, but also oil, given all the geopolitical conundrums and shenanigans, I guess, going on right now, right? For example, and that could result in higher than anticipated commodity prices. So with that said, we're attempting to land this budget with all this going on around us.
So please note that Councilmember Holloway arrived at 5:13. Thank you.
So consequently, council has some extremely hard choices. The administration recognizes this. It is not something that we're envious of, but we appreciate that we have you here to help us through this. Considering the perceived economic challenges, our question to you is, what is council's tolerance for approving some of the proposed investments? What does council, and what we've asked before is, what does council want to see changed to the proposed budget, taking into consideration some of these perceived economic challenges? And there's a trade-off involved here. There's a trade-off in terms of balancing levels of service the city provides to the community versus limiting our reoccurring expenditures and protecting our cash position over time. And that is kind of the challenge that is before you as we kind of proceed through this month. One of the things that council should consider when it's making these decisions, it should consider the nature of the investments that we're proposing, whether they're ongoing or one time. The administration believes that the proposed budget tries to reasonably strike that balance, but council may have a different opinion, and that's okay. Just a couple important points to make. The budget charts an organizational and financial path for the next biennium, but we do not need to stay on that path if things change. Finance is going to watch trends and report to council if the city should make any adjustments. We need to remain at maximum flexibility, and that is our intention within the administration. In addition, your decision regarding the proposed investments within this budget may be a hard yes or no, but could also be a not yet. There's a third option there. And if it's a not yet, whatever transpires in the next couple months, next quarter, next couple quarters, for example, the administration is more than happy to return to council to review or re-review some of these proposed investments that we're offering here as a part of this budget. So like we've kind of addressed at the last presentation, there's a number of major changes, additions to the budget above and beyond what we've incorporated into our base level of service that we hope to provide to the community. I know everyone has seen these tables before and we'll probably return to them later. We'll just go through them really quickly here. All right, with that said, we'd like to get to some of your questions from November the 1st, 2022, unless there's comments after that.
Pro Tem Mayhew.
Yeah, just a informational request. I wonder, I'm not sure who I'm directing it to, but with regard to the comment that was just brought up about not yet, and just thinking in my head about how something like that could play out. I wonder if we could just review again. So we do a biennial budget right now. So with that cycle in mind, I just want to get clear on what it would take to do something now and then amend a budget 3 months from now as a hypothesis, and then 1 year from now. And what I'm really trying to get at is I have a belief that amending the budget 1 year from now as part of the mid-biennium review is something that can be done with a majority of council members. But if we were to do a budget amendment at any other time, it would require a supermajority of council members. And I just want to make sure that that's a correct understanding.
I'm going to look towards legal, but I do believe that is a correct understanding of, the situation. Basically, any sort of budget amendment that doesn't take place within that mid-biennium review will require a supermajority or at least 5 votes. That one time that we do have that mid-biennial budget review will require 4 at least.
With the caveat that there are exceptions provided in the statute for emergencies, and some of the circumstances that Mr. Boutte's opening statement described may well fall into that category and might allow the council more flexibility depending what happens with.
Could you just refer back to one of those that might be an example of such an emergency? Just trying to make sure we all kind of are tuned into what the options are.
I'm trying to that's in front of me. So for example, the midterm elections are coming up. And there will be elections next year. There are various predictions about whether violence might be associated with any of that or not. So RCW 35A 34-140 allows for budget expenditures to be made upon the happening of any emergency caused by violence of nature, casualty, riot, insurrection, war, or other unanticipated occurrence requiring the immediate preservation of order or public health, or from property that's been damaged or destroyed. And then the list goes on of various things, needs to meet mandatory expenditures. So we hope none of those things happen, but they could.
Thank you.
All right, now onward to some of the questions from November the 1st. To start off with, we want to discuss the reconciliation question. In your appendices 8.3, there's a biennial budget comparison table. It was pointed out to us that if you were to add up the internal service charges and column M with the 2023-24 operating expenditures in column O for the general fund, that total is equal to $42.5 million. That was compared to the financial forecast working table, which under 2023 and 2024, the financial forecast working table was appendices A1. What we show here is that the total 2023 recurring expenditures are equal to $20.1 million, and the total 24 recurring expenditures are equal to $20.8 million for a total of $40.9 million. Those two numbers do not match. Basically, a difference of, as shown in this slide, 1.6 million. So the difference between the two tables is basically, if you were to look in the financial forecast working table, appendices A1, there are also two totals that we want to include as a part of that. That is the total 2023 expenditures one time, and the total 24 expenditures one time as well. So basically just write down from your reoccurring expenditures column, there's a, row, there's also a one-time expenditures row as well for 2023 and 2024. When you add up those two numbers, roughly $900,000 and $700,000, that is equal to 1.6 million. And that describes the reconciling difference that you had initially.
Counselor Johnson.
Just glancing at that list, it looks similar to our list of options that we had for, yes, things
Yeah,
to consider.
correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. A lot of it is. So any sort of reoccurring expenditures that we listed ongoing in those tables, they're up in the upper section here in the recurring expenditure section. Anything that's kind of listed as one time that is general fund related, it will show up down here. The reason for this is because the biennial budget comparison table, appendices A3, does not distinguish between reoccurring and one-time expenditures. So it's just all expenditures within that table.
Counselor Watton.
And so a follow-up to that, at 1.6 million over the course of 2 years, we also have the one-time ARPA funds that we've set aside for this type of expenditures. Is that not true?
That would be reasonably true.
Thank you.
I mean, we could use any source of funding within the general fund itself in order to support those one-time expenditures, right? For example, but in essence, ARPA is a one-time source of revenue. And so we do want to match that with our one-time expenditures.
Does it exceed?
So the
Yes.
ARPA funds, if you actually look in your financial forecast table itself, we do have a section for transfers down below. It shows you how much we're transferring in from ARPA. In total, you're going to see roughly a $2.1 million transfer in from ARPA into the general fund itself. So it does exceed the 1.6 million that you see there.
So Counselor Say had his hand up. And then-
Drew's response took my.
Okay, Counselor
Holloway. So I'm concerned, those one-time ARPA funds ought to be done one-time expenses. Otherwise, you're incurring recurring costs and you're just digging a hole in the future. Okay, because you won't have those one-time funds to cover them in the future. And we really stated before that those ought to be focused, again, one-time funds focused on revenue generation or expenses reduction.
Counselor Benson.
Troy, but would that apply really to the ARPA funds, since those are kind of, weren't those meant to make up for damage that we took? During the-
Damage, so one-time damage that we took, not, again, if you incur a recurring expense using the ARPA funds, the funding for that runs out once the ARPA funds are gone.
Right,
You're digging a hole in the future.
right, but aren't we getting those funds because we got dug into a hole as a result of pandemic? And aren't those funds that we're paying for, aren't those a representation of that hole potentially? I mean,
Well, and if you,
Am I thinking about it wrong? I mean, I know there's developer funds that we get and we set those aside because those are one-time.
Point
So
of order.
instead of having a discussion between two council members, perhaps you can address it to our
Totally.
budget
Okay.
manager and he can respond to you.
So I just want to make sure that we make the distinction of what we see in that financial forecast working table. We're not commingling transfers and we're not commingling one-time expenditures in with our recurring expenditures and recurring revenues. So I'll make it very clear that we're trying to relate our recurring revenues to our recurring expenditures. And that is what you see in the financial forecast table on page 14, basically of your budget book. And so I want to make sure that that has clearly been identified. There is a transfer out, for example, that to the capital non-utilities capital fund for $2.5 million. And so you can still find one-time expenditures above and beyond the amount that we've kind of listed just strictly for the general fund, if you were to account for that transfer to the non-utilities capital fund as well. So not sure if that answers your guys' question. That's what I was thinking about. That was my thought bubble as you guys were talking. So.
Mayor Pro Tem Mayhew.
Thank you. You have no idea what a big sigh of relief this is. I have been worried since our last meeting that we have a $1.6 million hole in the budget. And so I'm just extraordinarily pleased. I can see that just below the total of the one-time expenditures, we see the ARPA money. So we can see that covers the one-time expenditures list. So this is a huge sigh of relief for me on this point. I have some questions about some of the items in that one-time expenditure list, but first let me get back to the other thing I was worried about, and maybe this is something you're going to talk to us about in a minute, but I'm worried about the assumption that we'll do these massive tax increases. I call them tax increases, fee charges, various increases. Were you going to talk to us at all about that?
Yes,
I will
that's
wait
part
for
of the
that.
slide deck. Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm. All right.
Councilor Johnson.
Yeah, I just wanted to keep on the present topic with one more thing here. So I see that the ARPA transfers for both years are greater than the total one-time expenditures.
Mhm.
So does that mean that we still have about a $500,000 hole then that we're covering with ARPA funds?
No.
So what happened to the other $500,000 from ARPA?
Well, so some of that could be, for example, transferred to our non-utilities capital fund. So we have a transfer out from the general fund to the non-utilities capital fund, and maybe it's just a bit of a roundabout way, right? For example, to get there, but capital is usually just a one-time expenditure, right? And that is what we would match it with.
That was my concern. Thanks.
So you have like a $2.5 million transfer, right?
Yes.
Out of there. Mayor Pro
Mhm.
Tem Mayhew.
Yeah, it looks from the chart that actually just goes to fund balance. So I'm just looking at in the 2024 column, I see total one-time expenditures, 680,000. Then I see the ARPA and the various items in the next section, transfers 990, and the difference appears to just be falling to fund balance. So is that a correct conclusion that we're just that excess ARPA money, not necessarily itself, but the result of the excess ARPA, let's not use that term, the result of the ARPA money being greater than those one-time expenditures is that a fund balance addition happens. Is that a correct conclusion?
I think that would be correct. I think you could also potentially state that we're accelerating a transfer to the non-utilities capital fund and therefore you're just replenishing, right? For example.
Can you point to the line item just so we can
So
spot
there's
that?
a transfer out to the capital funds of $2.5 million that exceeds the 1 million that we have there and the 1 point. So if you add in the one-time expenditures as well, then in essence, you're just kind of borrowing and then supplanting that with to repay back, say, the general fund or replenish the general fund.
So it'd be correct to understand then in 2023, we've got transfers. Sorry, the ARPA money is less than the one-time expenditures and transfers. So we
Mhm.
draw down fund balance.
Mhm.
And in 24, the reverse is true and we build it. Not necessarily exactly, but we build it back up towards where it was. Is that a correct understanding?
Yes.
Got it.
Mhm. All right, so I'm going to move on to,
Quick question on that, if I could follow up.
Councilor Say,
Yeah, I mean, so I guess I'm trying to understand why the ARPA transfer in is spread out over 2 years if we know that the transfer out that's being proposed to capital funds is greater than that ARPA funds anyway. Why isn't it just all listed in 2023 and we just draw from?
yeah, so I
Fund
wouldn't say
balance.
that there's any sort of great thought processing right behind that. I think over time, we've said roughly this amount of money for the next 3 years, and we've just kind of stayed consistent with that for the most part, just to equal it out over the 2-year period. But you could probably transfer, it is a 2-year budget overall, so breaking it down by year doesn't necessarily make that much sense. We could transfer it all out in 2023, but it's just been split into the 2 years itself, so.
Because we do look at our budgets as a 2-year budget, not a 1-year budget.
Correct.
So, yeah,
Mhm.
I understand. So really, we should be, it's the ending fund balance at the end of 2024 is really the ending fund balance
Right.
for this budget.
Mhm.
It's not
Yes.
a 1 year, not a each year, even though we may do some true upping and all that kind of stuff.
Right,
That's a technical term, true upping.
love it.
write that one down.
All right, so onward.
Sorry, just to
Pro
take,
Tem Mayhew,
excuse me, thank you. Just take that one step further. I just want to make sure I'm following this. So if I start with the beginning fund balance at the beginning of biennium, top left of the page,
Mhm.
4.4 million. If I then take out the transfer out to capital funds, 2.5 million down at the bottom of the total transfers,
Mhm.
then all other things being equal, I might expect the ending fund balance at the end of the biennium to be about 2 million. And so if we go look at the column, the ending balance at 2024, we see a number that's about 2 million. So there's a little bit of noise there, but that might be another way of understanding the big picture on this. Is that a correct
I
understanding?
think that's fair. Mhm. Okay. All right, so on to the next one. We'd like to discuss with you internal service charges. That's here. Not everyone was present at the last F&A committee meeting, so we want to go over some of the material that we presented there. And we had where we discussed the internal cost allocation plan for the city overall, as well as some budgetary assumptions. Question you might have is, what is cost allocation? Well, cost allocation is a method to determine and assign the cost of internal services such as finance and IT to the users of those services, such as police and fire. Cost allocation thereby enables local governments to more accurately account for the complete cost of the services it provides to the public. So the term allocation implies that there is no overly precise method available for charging a cost, so an organization uses the approximate method. For example, if we want to figure out what is the total cost in order to run a police department, you not only just have to include the police officers, but you have to factor in my time, for example, Bob's time over here, the city attorney, any sort of HR support that goes into that. And that's why cost allocation is so important. So what are some of the types of indirect services that we provide here at the city of Snoqualmie? These services are basically such as IT. They're not providing a service to people outside the city. They're providing services within the city itself. So types of indirect services include the administration, such as the executive, city clerk, city attorney, finance, human resources, communications, IT, which I just mentioned, our fleet, or as we call it here, equipment replacement repair, as well as facilities maintenance too. The basic steps of the cost allocation process include identifying indirect services, just as I listed, identifying the costs to be allocated. So how much have we budgeted for each of those indirect services for the most part? And then probably cleaning the data a little bit as well. Determining the allocation factors, the methodology to distribute costs equitably between the different funds and functional classifications and departments. Then we go out and we actually allocate the costs. And then we update and monitor the data and methodology to ensure the allocation remains fair and equitable over time. That's just a little preview. The question that we received on November the 1st is, within the biennial budget comparison table, within appendices A3, you'll notice some pretty large increases in the internal service charges between the 2021-2022 budget and the 23-24 internal budget. And the cited examples include the police department, fire, water operations fund, sewer operations fund, and stormwater operations fund. So we've got some of those dollar figures here, and you can see pretty large jumps between each one. Reason for these jumps, some of the major drivers basically include the changing nature of the allocation factors. So in terms of, say, using FTEs are generally changing as well. If you're the stormwater operations fund, we're actually increasing the FTEs there by a pretty good amount, by about 2 FTEs in total. In addition, we've included in here some major changes and additions, such as the police car take-home program that also impact our allocations as well. In addition, we've expanded the administration charge to include supplies and services. So when we're charging out of the general fund, to say the water operations fund and the sewer operations fund, we're not only just including the salaries and wages of the employees, but also the supplies and services too. And then lastly, handling the charges that would be allocated to North Bend Police Services Fund. As a part of the contract with North Bend, our charge does not include anything for IT as a part of that. Consequently, the general fund has to pick up that, or what we've proposed as part of the budget is the police department would pick up the tab for that. So consequently, those are some of the major drivers that we have that resulted in the increases that you see. Furthermore, just regarding the 21-22 internal service charges, the 2021-22 internal service charges were inflated at 2%, roughly 2% across the board from 2019-2020. And we're really not based on any cost allocation factors at the time. And so it was a pretty hectic time frame. We're in the middle of the pandemic. And so that was just something simple that we did in order to help us get through that budget cycle. The question that was asked presumes that the cost allocation work completed for the 2019-2020 budget was satisfactory. And I think internally we might question whether that was actually satisfactorily handled back then, and we're trying to correct for it as much as possible through this. And consequently, at the F&A committee meeting that we presented the internal cost allocation to, we thought we provided a fair way to allocate the costs. And so that was our intellectually honest attempt at cost allocating this round. So to summarize a little bit, the city reviewed the methodology behind the 23-24 internal service charges at the Finance Administration Committee on October the 18th. We understand that we may struggle with your trust on the internal cost allocation charges. Consequently, the city has proposed and has budgeted for an independent assessment of our cost allocation study, as well as an internal service fund review and a utility rate study as well. We understand that given maybe some of the increases that you might see in the water, sewer, and stormwater operations fund, that it may necessitate a utility rate study or potentially increases in the future, but we want to make sure that we're accurately capturing the costs so that no fund is subsidizing another fund and vice versa. And so we hope to go through an internal assessment of our cost allocation using an outside consultant to come in and provide that independent review, because I'm not sure that we necessarily have the trust of council. And so that will hopefully provide that trust. And then we can also then involve that or incorporate that into a future utility rate study moving forward.
Mayor Pro Tem Mayhew.
So just for the rest of the city council members information, one council member's point of view is I have absolute and complete confidence in our staff's ability to do cost allocations. I do this for a living. Cost allocations far more complex than what's being done here. I've done simple, hard, easy, complex, 1-step, 3-step, even 4 or 5-step cost allocation plans, meaning you allocate costs to another department and then that department allocates again. Okay, and so on, depending on how complex your organization is and what you're trying to get to. And I will just say for our city, I have absolute confidence. I don't think we need to spend 1 penny on an outside person to come in and look at it. I think they articulate it well, and I think they calculate it well. Now, I think there's great discussions to be had about their basic assumptions that they make. We don't need an outside consultant to help us do that. We just discuss it with our staff. So my own view is They don't need that, and they should actually absolutely know that we believe in their ability to do this and have our confidence. And they don't need to go get someone else to back them up on this. That's my point of view for what it's worth. Having said that, with regard to the costs here, I will say every biennium that I've been involved with, unfortunately on these funds, what we said is the last biennium was all fouled up. So we actually, I'm probably going to get the numbers wrong, not last biennium, the biennium before, we were substantially changing the rates up because the biennium before that, we had substantially taken them down. That was before I was on the council, but that had happened and they realized that was a mistake, took them back up. We just heard the description. Well, then what happened last year? Well, we kind of just carried over because we just were in the middle of pandemic and we were staff challenged, et cetera. Fine. Now we're looking at it saying, wait a minute, maybe it's really off. Maybe it is. I'm open to that. We only just got the first presentation of it at the last F&A committee. We're planning to discuss it tomorrow night. I think there's a discussion needs to be had. Regardless of whether we had it right before or didn't, I think it's just a question of why is this the right amount? And I do think there's a question that needs answering with this much of an increase, because it's a 16.5 increase in total to the operating fund. That much more. I just want to have a discussion about why is that necessary? I presume the answer has something to do with, oh boy, all of our funds are in trouble. They're inadequately funded. They're running out of money. We got to jack this back up to make sure, because we haven't funded the expenditures. I just haven't heard that yet, but we weren't supposed to. That's on tap for tomorrow night. But I still think, in my mind, it's an unanswered question. What's wrong in these funds that we need to pop this 16.5% just to the operating funds? And then there are very substantial increases also down in the utility funds. So I just want to make sure I know why we're putting all this.
Is that nice?
Which I can wait till tomorrow night to hear.
Sure. Councilor Watton.
Yes, when Mr. Boutte yield to a series of questions.
Well, yes, of course, that's.
Okay, that's just so that I have a better understanding. First of all, and maybe I should preface it with a statement. I'm concerned about us characterizing us running out of money, because that's the purpose of having reserves. Are we truly running out of money on any of our lines of credit or on our existing expenditures exceeding revenue?
Well, it's so the financial forecast table that we're presenting certainly shows our recurring expenditures eventually exceeding our recurring revenues, right? And so we
A
need to
few
make sure
years
that,
out, correct?
yeah, beyond 2 years. So in the long term, right, showing that, maybe not necessarily in the short term.
Okay.
Mhm.
So,
And we're above reserve targets, right? So,
right.
mhm,
Okay, so there are reserves
Yes.
to buffer against it, correct?
correct.
It's a known fact that our IT is needing to be shored up. It means a lot more work on the front end if you're changing systems. Does that have an impact on this 16.5% increase in services that affects every department?
I wouldn't say necessarily. So it's a very important question that you're asking about IT overall. The cost allocation process that took place was largely within the wheelhouse of the previous IT director,
Mhm.
2 directors ago. The director that we had no conception of internal cost allocation. We've been trying to pull that into our house, right? For the most part, finance's house overall. And so we need to actually do an investigation into IT, because we would hope to set up something similar to what we have with our ER&R program, where we have a replacement schedule with servers kind of listed out over time, any sort of pieces of equipment that we track the number of licenses, for example, from Office 365 to others, right? And then we have a full schedule that we can say provide to council at the proper time. That is certainly going to help us to actually build out a full replacement schedule, because I think that is an important charge that we need to make sure that we're fully recuperating over time, much like the ER&R is a sinking fund. I believe IT should also be very much like a sinking fund as well. The the ERP system itself will eventually add annual fees, right? And those fees will exceed what we're currently paying for Springbrook. That is a component eventually of the charge, of this charge moving forward. And yes, it does incorporate or is incorporated as a part of that overall increase that was cited. But it is not the only thing. We need to continue to really hone in and investigate IT and what they actually need moving forward. So
Do you see that need to dive deeper into our process for IT, something that can be handled internally, or we'll need an outside consultant to come in to do for us, which is going to be more efficient? Which path would be more efficient? And is that part of the 16.5%?
So, I mean, that's probably $1 million question, right? For example, depending on what happens in this budget cycle, we are obviously proposing a budget analyst as well for the finance and HR department. If that budget analyst is approved, that will increase our capacity within this department to potentially actually do the internal cost allocation plan internally. If we have the full confidence, as the Mayor Pro Tem cited, that we could actually figure this out, then yeah, I think trying to handle it internally could be appropriate for that situation if we potentially get that budget analyst on staff. If we don't have the full confidence of council, then I'd like to have an independent review take place so that you do have some sort of guarantee that someone else has reviewed it instead of our work necessarily. But that is, yeah, to be, I guess, debated, but based on what is said here, I think that would probably be ideal if we have that support. So
And I guess my final question, and that is, are you confident that what you're presenting us in the budget, a conservative approach, meaning that we may overstate the cost versus the revenues coming in?
So we included inflationary increases in terms of everyone's base budget of 6.6% for 2023 and 2.5% for 2024. We all have a sense of inflation, and we were delivering those to the departments, right? Over the summer, for example, with an anticipation would be within that. I think inflation is probably a little bit higher right now, but they're going to be potentially impacted by those increases, but they have to kind of make it work at this stage. In terms of maybe some increases above and beyond, we do budget for full staffing in the city. So come January 1st, right, there are going to be certain new positions, right, that we will probably not have hired or in this space right as January 1st. In addition to that, there are going to be attrition over time. As soon as people leave the city, it could take a good 3 to 4 months, 5 months to fill back those positions. And so that will create maybe some cushion, right, for example, to kind of balance this out. So I don't know if that answers your question, but yes, we do maybe overstate a little bit the expenditures, but I'm not necessarily here to tell you there's going to be a bunch of pluses and minuses as we progress through this time frame. And it's just a matter of monitoring what those pluses and minuses are and how big they are in comparison to each other.
So there are safety valves in place.
To a certain extent, right? I can't guarantee that there's going to be attrition right over time necessarily, but there could very well be an expectation that we might achieve some.
Thank you.
Councilmember Johnson.
I just wanted clarity on something I didn't have, I don't think, a good grasp of, and that's with the internal service charges. Did you say that that can also go toward FTE?
So the internal service charges, so what you do is you figure out what is your kind of total budget overall for each of these internal services. That includes personnel.
Okay.
So if we're thinking about IT, and we've got 2 employees behind me right now, that would be included as a part of that internal service charge out to, say, the police department or the fire department, for example. So those, yeah.
Okay.
Personnel is a part of that.
And If I could continue,
Yes.
thank you. Yeah, and I thought that I heard you say that part of that for you, the utilities was for stormwater positions. Is that correct?
So for example, if you're using FTE as an allocation
Mhm.
measure overall, so for example, if you're human resources, how is their time actually utilized? Well, it's generally FTEs would be a good basis for allocating out their costs because they're dealing with employee benefits and, you know, a lot of different hiring, recruiting, things like that for the different departments. So if your stormwater is equal to roughly say 5%, your total FTE count, and maybe that increased from 2%, right? For example, of what you're proposing in the next biennium, then of the HR charges, they're going to pay 5% of that as opposed to 2% previously. And so that can certainly have an impact. As we also shared, we did increase the admin service charge from just salaries and wages and benefits to also include supplies and services, which more fully accurately captures, right, overall the administrative overhead that we actually accrue here at the city or incur at the city.
Thank you. Yeah, I wanted to share with my fellow council members that at Parks and Public Works, when we reviewed that part of the budget related to stormwater, I felt rather convinced by Mr. Chambliss that there is a definite need there. And I always keep an open mind, so I could be convinced the other way, I suppose. But it sure seems like those folks working on stormwater are worked very hard. That does mean that over time that that part of the utilities budget and the utilities budget overall seems like perhaps the fund balance is going down over time. So at some point we may need a utility rate study to see if we need to do something to better support that. There was one other question that I had for you, at least at the moment, and that is a program really a one-time expenditure?
So what we've done as a part of the financial forecast table, which is what I think you're referring to, for example.
Looking at this page.
Are you-
A1?
Yeah, so that is the financial forecast working table. So what you're talking about is the police car take-home program, correct?
Yeah, I'm just curious, does that really count as a one-time expenditure if it's a program?
So we treat that not only as just, so what you're seeing as a part of the one-time expenditures here, just the vehicle purchases itself to get it up and running. In addition, there are ongoing expenditures that are actually included as a part of the reoccurring expenditures above there. So in essence, we've separated the difference between the two. We understand it's not just a one-time component. There's also an ongoing operating component tied to that as well. And we've made that distinction here in this table. So what you're seeing across the 4-year period for this police car take-home program, and I think we just also include a vehicle purchase as a part of that, is you're just seeing the 4 vehicle purchases over that 4-year period.
So I do have a comment regarding the ERR. In September 7th at the FNA, finance was requested to go out and get a quote right away to look at consultants that would come in and review the ERR or the cost allocation plan. And I know our director of finance did this. And so if you're interested in hearing more about what the consultant would do, she can get online and explain that. So if you want to hear about it, let us know. Otherwise, they'll call on, I think Mayor Pro Tem Mayhew was next, and then Councilmember Holloway.
Yeah, I just want to do a follow-up question before we close out on this question of internal service charges. So the increase that's proposed is 16.5% over the last biennium charged to the operating fund, the general fund departments. The spending, so that money goes to the internal service funds, the 500 series. We go down and look at this proposed spending increases. The ER&R fund, it's talking about a 32% increase. IT fund, a 27% increase. And the facilities maintenance fund, a 52% increase. So it seems that we're not re-looking at allocations, we're substantially changing the spending levels and then having to allocate in order to cover the cost of that. Is that not a correct understanding of what how these numbers relate?
So I think focusing on bullet point number 2 is important here. Major changes and additions. I know we had a conversation at the previous F&A committee where it talked about double counting to a certain extent, and there were some questions from council about, well, why would you tack on to the internal service charge, for example? So examples that come to mind, the security infrastructure that we're proposing here at City Hall. I think what we've incorporated as part of the budget is that would be sponsored by the executive, for example, but it would be paid for out of the facilities maintenance fund itself. Consequently, we're actually transferring money or using that internal service charge to get money from the general fund and get it over to the facilities maintenance fund to actually do that work itself. So there's this baseline level service charge. But then in addition to that, there's a lot of work that we're proposing to do out of the internal service funds, such as the security infrastructure at City Hall. Let me just go into the book itself. So things like council chambers, audiovisual upgrade, for example, the additional enterprise resource planning system project modules. When we think about ER&R, you've got vehicle purchases and the increases associated with that. So some of these things are tacked onto and then added up that actually increases the work that we're proposing or the amount of funding that we need or the appropriation that we're proposing within those funds itself. Not only that, if you think about the mechanic 2 that we're proposing as a part of the ER&R fund as a result of the police take-home program. We also have proposed an IT manager position in addition to the current staffing levels that we have in IT to shore up IT, as we've stated previously too. So there's certainly a lot of proposed increases as part of the internal services, but we do think administratively that this is critical and these are some critical functions for the city overall.
Right, but those are presented in A1 as one-time expenditures, but if they're going into the internal service funds, those are permanent, those aren't one time. Like, you just described a whole bunch of things as reasons why the internal service fund expenditures are going up, which then causes the internal service charges against all the departments to go up. But you seem to be describing things that were ongoing, not one time. So I'm really worried about what it's going to mean. I guess if we look at your chart A1, if we look at 2025, I guess those would all contain a continuation of the internal service fund charges just carrying on, right?
So what would I?
So if it's covered by revenues, I guess that would address the question I'm asking, huh? I'm trying to get at sustainability.
Yeah, so you're trying to get to sustainability, but what I'm trying to, I guess, tell you is the internal service charges themselves don't necessarily indicate sustainability, right? They're not representing just reoccurring charges. They're also representing recurring one-time charges as well. So when you're thinking about the total itself, a percentage of that is for one-time purposes, right? To build, for example, the security infrastructure at City Hall or to handle the council chamber AV upgrade. Maybe as a part of tomorrow, if there's enough time, it'd be better to actually distinguish about what have we actually built on top of that reoccurring charge, right, for the internal services, right?
Got it.
Because in essence, we need a sponsoring department, right? The executive is sponsoring quite a bit of that. The council chamber AV upgrade are also sponsoring, for example, the security infrastructure at City Hall. Someone needs to pay for that. There's no money sitting inside, say, the facilities maintenance fund in order to accomplish that because we haven't built up any sort of amounts over time in order to handle that work, then it needs to come from somewhere and it has to, in this case, it's coming from the general fund, so.
Councilor Holloway, do you have a question?
Yeah, I want to go back to the police cars. I'm sorry, the agenda bill was before the council for the police cars, and we said no, as part of contract negotiation. We haven't got into contract negotiation now, yet we have presumed a result in here of purchasing the cars. I'm confused of why we want to hobble that contract negotiation to come by presuming things that ought to be specified in that negotiation. Sorry, the one-time car purchases to get the one car for every police officer ought to be taken out of the budget and put back down in reserves. if you're truly negotiating on behalf of the citizens instead of the police department. I'm sorry, guys, this is not right. So I would truly like to hear your consideration of taking those and putting them back down and taking them off and putting those funds back down into the ending fund balance. That's probably a question to you, Mayor, and to the chief. Not finance just does what you guys tell them to do in this case. But I think we've done something inappropriate here.
So I think we're starting to get into a discussion that may be best for an executive session, for example, that we have planned later after a couple additional questions or that I'd like to go through here. And we'd like to take it up then that might be.
Well, I'm not so sure. Even if we were to say the police department has to have a particular brand of shoes, and we wanted to put that into the next discussion of contract, it should not be in the budget until we do that contract negotiation. Per the training we just had, guys. So I don't want to taint that contract negotiation coming up by presuming a benefit that we have not agreed upon yet.
And one of the potential closed session that's on the agenda is for possible discussion of labor relation strategies and so on. So to Mr. Boutet's point, we're happy to have a conversation probably better to have a conversation in that setting to address your comment.
Counselor Benson.
Mr. Boutet, I'm sorry, maybe you can help me out. Is there a place in our financial management policy where it describes the difference between one-time and recurring? Is that something that's covered in our financial policy, or is that just like a glossary term?
I don't necessarily recall a definition in our financial management policy, but I'd like to turn it to Jen if she has any idea if there's something within our financial management policy that makes that distinction.
Mayor, if I might.
Yes, please.
There is, as Mr. Boutet said, that there is not a specific definition in financial management policy. In the budget section, it does refer to what Mr. Boutet has been articulating about balancing recurring revenues, recurring expenditures, but no specific definition on one-time versus ongoing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is that something that we, because the way that Mr. Boutet was talking about it, he was pointing out that there is a gray area where you might have a programmatic one-time thing for a long-term recurring program. Should that be something in our financial policy that would?
So I think as a part of the overall budget document, we've got a glossary section all the way at the back. I think we should probably add definitions for those two items so that it's clear for council. When I think of a recurring expenditure, it's an ongoing obligation that the city will want to continue to pay into the future. If it's one time, then it's usually just a very discrete event that we want to incur once for the most part. And so maybe it's relatively unclear, but yeah. In essence, I think we should incorporate it as part of the glossary moving forward.
Councilor Watton.
So question to the finance department. The finance policy 6.0 refers to capital budget with definitions. Does that cover the question that the council member raises?
So you said 6.1?
6.0?
No, 6.0.
Under capital budget.
Mm-hmm.
Finance director has hand up, may want to have input.
Director Ferguson?
Thank you. So I believe that the council member is referring to the definitions that describe capital outlay, capital programs, and capital projects. That it may or may not cover the question, but if there is an interest in placing in the financial management policy a description on one-time versus ongoing expenditures, that I would recommend that we place that in the budget section, and we can present a description to the council. There is coming up on the November 14th, the final policy adoption for council to consider, and we could offer a definition at that time, if that's sufficient.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Mayhew?
Yeah, actually, you've been given a wrong answer. Let me help out. So first off, what's really important to understand is that what we do with capital funds is very different than operating funds. Capital funds, by their nature, of course, in any given year, what we spend and what we take in, we're not looking to match those at all. Because capital funds are big one-time expenditures, it usually takes some period of time to accumulate the money for those. So we don't expect to see those. So it's a very different and so we accumulate capital funds with the idea of then spending them on things. So over the long term, that goes to zero, but not over the short term. With regard to the operating fund, if you go to section 5.4, balanced budget, it says recurrent. So this is in the section to do with the operating budget. So this is talking about the operating budget. The first sentence, the objective of the operating budget is to pay for all current expenditures with current revenues. Goes on to say recurring revenue should equal or exceed recurring expenditures in both the proposed and adopted budgets. So that's where the language is that's attempting to guide us to say recurring. So it does it the inverse. It doesn't say what is one time, it says recurring. So recurring revenue should cover recurring expenditures. And that's exactly how they've laid out Schedule A1 for us. They've listed out the recurring revenues, then the recurring expenditures, then the things that aren't recurring, both expenditures and revenues. So they're trying to follow this policy there.
Councilor Benson?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, but I think also it would be helpful for us to, I don't do this 5 layers deep. This is, I don't understand half the words you're saying, but
Did you say 5-layer dip?
but it's that sounds good. It would be helpful to know in those gray area situations. For example, we've got, just to use the fleet example, there is an expense that is going to be ongoing as the program continues, but to get it going feels like a one-time. Where do we draw the distinction? What is our policy that lays out clearly whether it's a one-time expense or a recurring expense? I think that your point about section 5.4 is a really good one, but I don't think it totally addresses that issue. So I think the finance director's suggestion of adding those definitions, I think, could be really helpful to us, in the future if we run into those gray areas.
I think in finance, we have this maybe a perception that we know it when we see it, right? For example, and so it's hard to translate that. I
Like
guess.
pornography in the 60s, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Like, does he know the reference he's making?
Righty.
Mhm.
Budget Manager
Okay.
Boucher?
So Onward from internal service charges, let's discuss the Affordable Housing Fund. This is another question. The administration budgeted $758,000 for the 2023-2024 biennium in the Affordable Housing Fund. That's Fund 131 for those playing along at home. The amount budgeted was basically a placeholder until we could figure out a plan. The administration, we haven't really had that much in terms of discussion regarding the Affordable Housing Fund. But we do know that the Community Development Committee and key stakeholders are working on that plan as we speak right now. And so what we want to say in terms of the administration, we're not opposed to zeroing out any appropriation for the Affordable Housing Fund. And we're turning out a later date with a budget amendment if we need to, right? For example, when that plan has been kind of solidified. So.
Mayor Pro Tem Mayhew.
So that makes sense. I just want to ask a question maybe of mayor or administration, but I'd also like to hear Councilmember Watten's thoughts, if he has any, on the question of whether we might be looking to spend any of that money in 2023. Why do I ask? Because the next chance we have as a council to amend the budget without a supermajority would be mid-biennium review, so 1 year from now. So I just want to look ahead and say, I believe the answer is we don't plan to spend it within a year, and therefore putting that off would be fine. I just want to make sure we don't have an unintended consequence of holding back on something we might want to spend within 1 year. So I just want to be sure.
Can I ask a question on top of that?
Councilor
for-
Say.
I like that. I would like to know that as well, but I also remember in our 2021-2022 budget, we approved a budget that had funding of $180,000 for housing studies and other activities related to just what we're talking about. I would like to get an update on whether that's being, has that been expended or where are we at? Because it doesn't seem to me, it doesn't seem to make sense to spend more money on something if we're already, or appropriate a funding for this if we don't have a plan.
And there was a housing study that was completed. And now I think it's actually being presented tonight during Planning Commission. But I think we also used funding in the past you can use it for like Snoqualmie Valley Shelter Services. You can help with rental, purchasing properties and redoing. There's a whole bunch of usage that you can use. I guess there's two different funds in there, right? There's a sales tax and there was another.
There's a sales tax credit and
Right.
an actual 0.1%
An actual sales
that-
tax. So they have different usages, but you can use some of this if you want to this next year.
I have nothing to add.
Didn't really answer my question.
Councilor Holloway.
Well, we left you hanging, Drew. So I guess the question, are we zeroing this out for a later budget amendment? Are we doing some smaller number, at least for the first half of the biennial, just in case? What is the plan for the Affordable Housing Fund?
Pro Tem Mayhew.
So my point of view would be, we don't appropriate money when we don't know what it's going to be spent for.
Right.
So my thought is, let's take this out of the budget, but please, administration, if you need to spend it, please come back and ask us, because we need to take care of affordable housing. And I just think we ought not to appropriate things without a plan to spend it. I think it's just bad hygiene, if you will.
Councilor Benson.
Yeah, it seems like if something did come up where we needed to spend that money, I don't know that a super majority is going to be a big problem for this council. I think when important things come up and it's clear that they're important things, generally we're of a mind to do them, and not a whole lot of people that are moaning about all this darn affordable housing we're getting done, so.
Okay. All right, onward to the next one. How much time do we have left? Before You mentioned the planning
Hours.
commission hours.
We
Okay,
have an hour.
okay. General fund sources. So this is the next question that we're attempting to address. We've got a general fund overview table on page 18. It was cited that the license and permits row that you see as a part of this slide, but as well as on that page itself is increasing substantially between 2023 and 2024, roughly 47%. And then in addition to that, it was mentioned that the charges for goods and services are expanding pretty substantially as well. So our goal is to kind of get into that a little bit tonight. So onward to the next slide. In terms of licenses and permits, we've got 3 revenue sources that make up roughly 99% of the total of that license and permits that you see, or of that row that you saw. That includes building permits. What we're assuming for the next 2 years is that 7.5 homes will be constructed in 2023 and 41.5 homes will be constructed in 2024. There is I wouldn't say that it's a proposal anymore. I'm not sure exactly what you would call it, but is the old LDS property that was sold, I believe, not sure how long ago. But that does have a proposal to construct homes on that property. Consequently, I know you can't really break one home into half, you know, but in essence, this is what we're estimating in terms of home construction here in the city.
It's an ADU.
Yeah. Over the next 2-year period, with a substantial amount of homes coming online in 2024 or requiring building permits at that time. This is more than what we have budgeted for 2022. And so consequently, we're potentially going to see, we're assuming that there's going to be a large increase in our building permit revenue in 2024. In addition, we've incorporated the solid waste admin fee. This is charged on top of not only just the utility tax or the fees that people are paying, but the utility taxes is also on top of that too. We're assuming a nearly 10% increase in 2023 as a result of the waste management passing on inflationary increases to consumer. A letter was submitted from Waste Management to the Parks and Public Works Director, and that letter, I believe, was presented to the Parks and Public Works Committee about middle of October, I want to say, and so we've incorporated that into the budget as well. Lastly, business licenses, and this is probably smaller, the 3 major revenue sources, assumes that the revenue manager will be able to generate increases in revenue equal to the change in the B&O tax, which the change in the BO tax that we're proposing that we've estimated is roughly 1.5 times the salary of the revenue manager. We're expecting the revenue manager to help us generate that amount. We'll get into some of these new ongoing revenue sources here shortly. So in essence, those increases that we're proposing in these 3 major revenue sources has resulted in these licenses and permits. Our estimate for that increasing roughly 47% between 2023 and 2024. Regarding charges for goods and services, we've included an increase in the admin charge. As we've kind of discussed in our internal service charge discussion, the admin charge now includes not only just salaries and benefits, but also supplies and services too. And we've also incorporated under charges for goods and services, new ongoing sources of revenue from the proposed comprehensive fee study and ground emergency medical transport GEMT billing. When you subtract for those above, the admin service charge, the comprehensive fee study that we're estimating, as well as, or what we'd hope to generate from the comprehensive fee study, as well as the ground emergency medical transport billing, the increase is equal to roughly 2.1% for 2023 and 4.7% for 2024. Regarding new ongoing sources.
Before you get off that slide, please.
Councilmember Holloway.
2 things. One, the business license and particularly the revenue manager. That is what I might call a non-recurring statement of work. To actually go and find those B&O, those businesses which are not currently doing B&O and bring them in. Yet it is a recurring position. The question is, why don't we take that position to the contract position for the 2-year period to get the B&O in line, and then that statement of work goes away and the position goes away. I'm still working, you know, in 3 years, we're deficit spending. So our job ought to be stretch that out. Structurally, we're going to get there no matter what. The law makes us do that. But just stretch it out. So again, question, I have a non-recurring statement of work. recurring position proposed for it, why is it not a non-recurring position and therefore a contract position?
So I might question if it's a non-recurring statement of work. Once you no longer have someone in that position, for example, we kind of go back to the old system unless we're prepared to replace that system with something that's better. And I don't know if necessarily have a solution that will say people will keep on top or stay on top of their B&O taxes and their payment in the city. If we go back, I mean, we're right now basically on the honor system. If we go back to the honor system after a 2-year stint, right, of having someone in place to try to correct all this, people could certainly fall away, right, from maintaining their B&O taxes and so on. And so we do believe, I think, a person in place to actually keep on top of that is important. Now, whether it's an actual employee versus maybe a contractor, that might be a good question, but I think I might challenge, for example, that it's a non-recurring statement of work.
It won't be self-funding past year 1, 2.
Well, if we stay on top of that B&O, right, over time, that's an ongoing source of revenue that the city's generating. So
Right, you have a certain level you're getting today, and you're assuming there's a certain level that I'm not getting because they haven't been self-identifying. And we're gonna bring this position in to recoup that difference. Okay, from there, yes, they will start to diverge, but it is nothing compared to the original, the deviation we have today. Therefore, again, I say that position will not be self-funding moving past this initial effort.
So what I worry about is that your B&O taxes will start to drop over time because you don't have anyone in that position. So,
And we may do this again,
mhm.
but what's the time period between when that deviation is enough for us to have a reaction versus having that position filled all the way through just when we get to that condition?
And then I would also add on top of that, it's not just the B&O tax auditing that we would request, but this position is slated to do more than that as well. So I want to make sure that we also address that as a part of the position overall. They will likely also be responsible for the ground emergency medical transport billing, in addition to maybe the B&O tax audit. There are other sort of tax revenues that may be within the Snoqualmie Municipal Code in which we're not implementing right now. Admissions potentially could be a decent source of revenue. I can't necessarily predict how much admissions tax we might receive as a consequence of that, but we need to make sure that we're following on any potential sources of funding out there for which we are not actively collecting for right now. I think, I'm not sure, there's money potentially on the table. And as within the city, we want to make sure that we collect the money that is currently on the table, and this position is slated to help us to accomplish that.
Okay.
Did you have some comments regarding
Go ahead.
that? Councilor Watton?
To follow along with the good council members' comments, one has to keep in mind that 2/3 of businesses operate without a shingle and a storefront presence. And I believe that's what the revenue manager would be making sure that those that should be paying the tax are paying the tax rather than going out to those that are reporting and paying to increase their taxes. So it's more of a matter of fairness that those that should be paying are paying. And there's a big disconnect even at the state level between those that file through the Department of Revenue versus those that file through the Secretary of State. That there are things that fall through the cracks, and I would believe that there are opportunities of making sure there's fairness in the taxes being collected. And if you don't have somebody manually looking at that on an ongoing basis, you're going to be missing out on the revenue. So I have faith that the finance department has identified this as a hole that we have that we could fill, and it will serve everybody with fairness and brings in more revenue than it costs us. So, I understand that it's not it may be seen as a one-time effort, but the number of businesses and the startups usually is somewhere around the neighborhood of 15-20% a year. And you do that over the time of 5 years, you're looking at 100%, if you looked at it that way. So there are a number of startups, and that's where the revenues would be able to be identified.
Oh,
Councilor Holloway.
so I'm not arguing that there needs to be ongoing attention to and whatnot. But I'm not sure as an ongoing concern, that's a full-time head. I agree that it's a full-time head to get us current. What is the statement of work to sustain that from there on? Is that a full-time FTE? And I'm hard pressed to think that's a full-time FTE on a recurring basis.
Mayor Pro Tem Mayhew.
Can you just tell us how much for each of the 2 years, 2023 and 2024, how much revenue you expect this revenue manager to generate for each year, and what the fully loaded cost is that we anticipate for the revenue manager each year?
I would say besides B&O tax, I mean, this would be a revenue manager that would enforce our contracts, ensure that we're getting paid, making sure that community development, when we hire consultants, that we bill the developers. There's a whole bunch of other things that this person would do than just B&O tax.
So I would agree with the mayor's statement. On page 27, we've got listed the revenue manager. The fully loaded cost of that revenue manager that we're proposing for 2023 is roughly $165,000. For 2024, given the COLA increases and benefit increases, we may see $171,000. That is on page 27. And then if I go to page 21, under the section titled New Ongoing Sources of Revenue, got a bullet point for B&O tax business license. So for 2023, we're estimating an increase of $247,000. And then for 2024, $256,000.
Thank you.
How were those calculated?
I took the revenue manager and multiplied that by 1.5 times the revenue manager.
I thought that would tweak your finance nerd.
Okay. All right, so regarding,
Oh, Councilor Johnson.
sorry.
Yeah, I'm surprised that we could be missing out on that much B&O tax if it's true. Just curious on the financial forecast working draft, appendix A1, under the sales and use tax and B&O tax for 2023, 2024. Can you just give me a sense of the proportion of the sales tax versus B&O tax for those numbers, or is there places broken out somewhere else? It can be rough.
Okay, as long as you're willing to go with rough then.
Yeah, rough is fine.
Okay. So I would say 60, well, more. Let's go 70% sales tax, 30% B&O tax.
Okay. I just want to get a sense of that versus this. Thanks.
Just to your comment regarding how much B&O tax might be out there on the table, it is hard for us to make any sort of assessment about what is, because we're unsure as much as anyone else is, I guess, regarding that. I think we're hoping to generate 1.5 times. We're hoping that that feels reasonable to council overall. What I would say is, from our experience, just moving from a in-house system for collecting B&O tax to moving to a online portal has done actually a pretty decent job to bringing in revenue, B&O tax revenue overall for the city. It's hard to make that distinction between, well, what was the impact of the pandemic, and there are other variables in play. But maybe somewhere along the lines of 10 to 20%, right? As a result of moving to that portal system, we have seen increase in our tax. As a consequence of that, and that's because it's easier for companies and businesses to access that. Sometimes they lose sight if they have to come in here, for example, and so it's just an easy way for people to pay their business licenses and B&O tax.
Mayor Pro Tem Mayhew.
So 2 questions for you back to the licenses and permits section. The first question is for building permits, when do we get paid that money? Is it sort of a compound question? When do we get paid that money? When the home starts construction, sort of throughout the construction period, or at the end of construction? That's number one. I'm asking with a mind to, you told us at the beginning of the discussion that we're likely going into a recession. So I'm trying to figure out the likelihood of 41.5 homes on that time frame. So I'm just trying to equate when these payments would happen and when a building cycle would be. And then I just want to sort of attach that as sort of the question of, do we not have to incur costs in relation to those fees? I had the general idea that generally those fees would generally have roughly equal outbound costs to contractors to do the work that's related to that, but maybe that's false.
I guess I'll start with the second one first. In essence, as part of this budget, any amount of private development review that would take place, I think we've estimated that about $360,000 2023. We're anticipating would come in under this thing called an engineering service charge at $360,000. So we have tied the two together across the budget. Building permits are outside of that itself. So that's an additional revenue source above and beyond the amount that we would collect back for the work that we've done on the development review itself.
So there's no variable cost really that goes into that. That's just recouping the cost of our, in essence, fixed costs of running that department.
Like,
Okay, got it.
Our building official and so
Yep.
on. In terms of the first question itself, I don't quite have the answer to that. I think I'd have to probably get back with the building official who is unfortunately on vacation right now. So he's out there hunting right now, but or if not, our CD director can certainly chime in if she wants to about when that would actually take place. But yes, if there is a recession, then there may be a delay, right, in the work that the developer would do on that side, and consequently, we may see ourselves shifting, right, that potential revenue source into the next year or next biennium.
One more follow-on, or?
Yes.
On the solid waste admin fee, when does our current contract with all possible extensions with waste management expire?
I would always refer to the Parks and Public Works Director, but I believe that we have one extension left for 2 years, I
2 years,
believe.
3 years.
2 years.
And so when would that extension, assuming we exercised it, when would that 2-year period be?
would like-
Rather than shooting from the hip, why don't we go back and look at the actual contract and get back to you on that?
2 minutes.
I get it in 2 minutes.
2 minutes.
Okay, the reason I'm asking, where I'm trying to go with that is I'm trying to understand why there would be a fee increase if we have a locked-in contract with waste management. So I probably just don't understand what the topic is.
I think that has to do with the contract itself.
Contract has
and
fee increases. Yeah.
Oh, so this is just something that's contractual. It's in the contracts. You're just building in.
I think they're
that
allowed
fee increase.
inflationary increases, for
Aha.
example, but.
So therefore you're saying, okay, it's in the contract. Let's plan for that.
Mhm.
They've already, sounds like they've already notified us that they're going to take advantage of that feature of the contract. So you're just saying, okay, mathematically, there's a knock onto the admin fee. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Got it.
Councilor Holloway.
So 2 things. Also, if there's a fee increase from King County for basically taking things to the dump, that gets passed through by contract. So that's part of that. A following question though is, what are the increased expenses to the city as a result of the waste management contract going up?
Going
Leading
what?
to a question of
I can't hear you. Going what? Talking in the
what are
mic.
the costs to the city, administrative wise, to the waste management contract going up? And my assumption
I
is
see.
next to nothing. Okay, it's a pretty low, our handling of that contract doesn't increase because their rate goes up. Okay, so my question from there is, do we have the option of doing the 10%, or we can do something less? Do we want to consider something less than that 10% increase when it's really not incurring additional costs to the city government for that contract going up? When we did that negotiation, that was always part of a potential discussion of mitigating some of these increases, was to take that administrative fee down. My question is this an opportunity to do that? That's probably a homework question for administration, not one for tonight.
Okay.
Mayor Pro Tem Mayhew.
So also happy for this to be a homework question unless you happen to have the numbers. I'm just looking at what's up on the slide. Do we know the dollar amount that's in this? So we see the licenses going up from, so we see them going to 603 and then going up to 886. Do we know how much of, in particular, the 886 increase, do we know how much attaches to each of those three categories? And if not, maybe you could find out for us.
Yes, let's figure it out for you.
City Attorney Sturbank.
Yeah, the answer to the question on expiration of the contract with Waste Management is expiration would be on May 31, 2025. That the extensions are in 2-year increments and the city has one additional 2-year increment remaining.
Very good.
Okay. So next slide.
Get a question?
I got one. So B&O and sales tax are bundled together in the material here. What is our B&O revenue for the biennium? Years in the biennium? Do we have that broken out anywhere?
Not in this material, but I can certainly get you that number.
Okay,
Mhm.
please, thank you.
I think it's, so in previous financial forecast tables that we've provided to council, we've bundled the B&O tax with the sales tax
Yeah,
basically in
and
the
that's
presentation.
what's through here too.
Yeah. So on to the next slide. In terms of new sources of ongoing revenue, I know we've covered a lot of this, B&O tax and business licensing. Kind of audit that we're proposing. The B&O taxes and business licenses are paid to the city currently on the honor system. The goal is to develop an internal audit program. And in addition, other tax programs such as the emissions need oversight to ensure compliance with the Snoqualmie Municipal Code. And so that's something that we're hoping to accomplish. And so, like I stated on page, I believe, what was that? 21, you can see the estimates that we've included for that. In addition, the comprehensive fee study. The goal is to investigate all fees set for things like building permits, the use of recreational fields, staffing rates and ambulance transport, and the degree to which the city should cost recover through its fee structure. And so we are, in addition, proposing a comprehensive fee study as a part of this overall budget. And then lastly, the ground emergency medical transport billing is offered through the Washington State Healthcare Authority. It is a supplemental payment designed to cover the funding gap between the city's actual cost per GEMT transport and the allowable amount received from Washington Apple Health, otherwise basically paid through Medicaid, and any other sources of reimbursement. We are one of, I believe, 2 jurisdictions within King County that does not receive this payment. So it is, for us, when we're thinking about this, this is money on the table that we should be going and getting basically from the Healthcare Authority. And so we're proposing that to get that in shape by 2024. And we've incorporated an estimate as a part of that as well in here. So in essence, in terms of new taxes, we're not proposing, say, B&O tax increase from 0.15 to 0.2% or anything like that. We are proposing to investigate what any sort of potential fee increases might look like for things like building permits, ambulance transports. We do believe it's kind of one of the lowest hanging fruit that we have available to us at the city is to look into that in comparison to maybe some of the other options that we've explored in the past, and we'll probably explore in the future. But in addition to that, we want to make sure that we get all the money that's available to us on the table and find those sources of revenue so that we can get them in the door and then support maybe some of our ongoing expenditures that are increasing over time, as we've seen and will experience. I guess on the last kind of subject, a little bit related to this, is anticipatory budgeting. We had some conversation at the last meeting discussing when do we exactly count the chickens, right? Or count the eggs in the basket. I'm not sure.
You have a question,
Yeah,
Councilor
I
Benson?
just would like to make a comment.
The chickens and eggs.
I know, I don't want to get to the chickens yet. No, just based on, what you were telling us about the ground emergency medical that's so fantastic that you guys are looking for that. I can't think of a better way of honoring taxpaying citizens than seeking out things like this that are money that is due to us, that isn't coming in. So just kudos for keeping an eye out for that kind of stuff, because I know I, for one, had no idea this existed. So thank God for you. But I think this is the kind of thing I keep on seeing over and over again from our staff, over and over again, where they're finding ways to either save us money or find money. And it's the most exciting thing that I see here is when a council member and a mayor find $6 million on a street coming down the hill, or you find 300 grand a year, and that is just sitting there waiting for you to pick up the bag. And when Mike Chambliss is combining projects so that he can save $57,000 here and $80,000 there, it's just such a fantastic way to let taxpayers know that you're looking out for them, that you take their money seriously, and I think we've got a fantastic staff, and it feels to me like everybody is doing this on one level or another. And we need to start handing out medals, because that's incredible. Thank you.
Well, no, thank you for your oversight, right, of everything that's going on here. for the
That's
most
right.
part,
This
but-
is me.
What I would share with you is, as a part of this, it's the level of service, right, expectation overall. So you may want to shrink your admin staff over time, but then you start losing sight of maybe some of these revenue opportunities. Some of the positions that we have in here, such as the revenue manager, we haven't even kind of discussed the CIP project manager too, which would hopefully obtain a number of grants for us over time and help to really build that up, so we are getting other people's money into the door as quickly as possible. That's really critical. And so if you're prepared to staff, right, those positions, they will bring in more money, right, than we would actually pay out for them. And so that's what a lot of these positions that you've seen here, I'm not sure how many, a good half of the positions are tied to that level of work.
One
right?
of the things that Chief Carrera talks about is the amount of money that they've saved from burning down in fires, right? That's a
Right.
stat that he keeps of the $21 million in saved property that was achieved in this year because of, just putting fires out and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
That's what, going after B&O taxes and stuff like that, you got to do that. But people are going to grumble about paying taxes because people grumble about paying taxes. Nobody is going to grumble because we're getting 300 grand from the state. That's not coming out of any taxpayer in Snoqualmie's pocket. It's only net positive. I would love to, when Parks and Public Works figures out a way to save money on a few different projects, I think that's a stat that we should be keeping, because I know that citizens would love to see that.
Councilor Holloway?
Clarification though, the GMT. GMT is not state money coming to us. This is a fee that will be charged to individuals who receive emergency medical ground transportation. So individuals or their insurance will be paying that to the.
I take it all back.
No, just want to make sure,
I think it's.
you may get a grumble or two from.
So
somebody who
there's the ambulance transport fees that people pay, and then there's this program itself. And so we have to make sure that the two are distinguished from each other. There is probably a roundabout way, right, through insurance rates and all that, in which people will have to pay for that. But the difference between our actual costs should provide that.
There's hands.
Not seeing. Oh, there's a hand.
Oh.
I mean, I
Let's
don't
talk
want,
to Chief
Just go
Carrera
with
can
the
talk about the
programs.
GEMT.
point of order, Mayor. I mean, we're in the middle of council members talking about stuff. I don't think we just immediately stop their conversation and go to somebody on.
Well,
not
everyone's
for
pointing at the
council.
hand, and I think Chief Carrera can fill us in on the GEMT.
All right, if you want to do that.
Yeah, I just wanted to highlight that actually the money that comes from ground emergency medical transport is a federal subsidy that comes through the state. It's not actually insurance payments that's coming out. It's actually coming from the federal government to offset the costs of the transports that we provide to Medicaid, because the fee that Medicaid doesn't provide does not cover the entire cost. So it's actually federal funds that are coming into the state.
Thank you,
Ooh,
Chief. I
snap,
sit
fall
corrected.
away.
I sit corrected. I don't stand, but I sit corrected.
You also have a hand up from Community Development Director Artecha. Emily?
Yes, thank you, Mayor and council members. This is Emily Arteche, the Community Development Director. I just point of a follow-up question that you had asked about when are building permit fees collected, and they are collected at the time of submittal. There are some other provisions about deferrals and other methods such as an estimate versus actual, but we do have actual fees prescribed in the Snoqualmie Municipal Code under 1504B 100. 140, excuse me.
Thank you.
So just to get back a little bit to the topic of anticipatory budgeting, where it was stated that we may not want to count our chickens before they hatch. There we go. That is certainly a policy that if council wants to potentially enact, they certainly could. We do know that there is precedent out there, not necessarily in local government, but federally, or even in the state, for example, where there has been some counting those chickens before they hatch. If you think about the Inflation Reduction Act that Congress just passed recently, they were prepared to set aside money for the IRS to eventually seek out people that are not paying their income taxes to bring in additional revenue to support some of the programs that they had included as a part of that Inflation Reduction Act. We can certainly go in a different direction from what we're proposing here, but we do think these are kind of critical revenue sources that we do want to generate over time and will support the city overall. And we think they're important to this budget to enable some of the programs that we have proposed as a part of this. And so if council proposes taking them out, then we will find the commensurate expenditures to take out as well, basically. So I'll just open it up to discussion on that topic.
Mayor Pro Tem Mayhew.
So my rough estimate of these increases we've just been talking about for 2024 over 2023. So not the 2023 amount, just the move from 23 to 24 is about 750,000. Now in that, you can just do the math between the two to see where I came up with that. It's just 23 and 24 on those two line items. So within that, I heard the 300 for the GEMT. Fine, that leaves 450. I think that we must not assume we can get revenues when we've never got those revenues before. And those are pretty massive things. I think we can sort of think about a fee study, but a fee study doesn't bring in a penny. What brings in pennies is when we decide to massively raise fees. I don't think we're going to do it. I don't think we've got the appetite for it. So let's say we discover that we're charging too little for parks. I don't see us going in and doing a 50% increase on our park fees. I see us trying to do something over time. I just don't see us doing something like that. So I don't think, you know, hopefully the revenue manager will bring in money. but I don't think we can spend that money. So here's the point. We're going to use that money in this budget. That's how we get a balanced budget that pays for ongoing expenditures. We take that 450 out. If you go to the chart on A1, take 450 of revenue out, then those expenditures, the ongoing expenditures, the recurring expenditures are no longer covered to the tune of 450. So I think that it's a big mistake. Look, if the money comes in, we can come back and add those positions then. So I think we should take an approach similar to what was suggested for some things that we might consider, which is not necessarily say no, not say yes, because I don't think we can count that revenue before it's come in. But let's say no for now. And then if that revenue comes in, then in 24, if we've received that revenue in 23, we can see it's coming in, then we can add positions then. But I think we've got to go relook at the positions we're looking at adding and dial back to that 450. I think we're trying to add positions with we're gambling a revenue stream will come in that we have no idea if it will. And I think we got to wait until that revenue stream comes in. So I think 450 of that is a mistake to include in the 2024 revenues. And we should take it out and take out enough spending to cover that, to leave enough of the spending in the ongoing, meaning let's not add as many staff as we're talking about. Because if this revenue doesn't come in, you're going to have to lay them off. Let's not do that. Let's wait till we got the money to hire them. We know we've got recurring revenue that can cover them.
Counselor Benson?
But wasn't some of the revenue dependent on having that employee to go get it? So, I mean, talking about chickens and eggs, which one comes first? I don't, in the estimate of how much that position was going to bring in, I'm not sure that I agree with the methodology necessarily of how much they were going to bring in, just taking the salary and multiplying it by 1.5. I guess I'd be more swayed if I knew, well, these are the B&O taxes that we have other reasons to believe are out there that we haven't collected. And our belief is that this position could bring in X percentage of those missing funds. If the numbers were done in the other direction, I'd probably feel more comfortable about it. But I think that if they are going to do a budget, then we do have to have some estimates of what do we expect to collect. And I think the real question is, how conservative do we want those estimates to be? That's what I kind of feel like I hear you saying, is that maybe we need to be more conservative about this, since and I understand that as well. The only problem that I have with what you're saying is it that the securing of those funds was dependent on the position. And so to say, well, let's hold off on hiring that position until we've secured the funds is we'll never hire the position, because those funds aren't going to come in if there's not that position to collect those funds. Does that make sense?
Mayor Pro Tem
Or
Mayhew?
am I understanding it right? So,
Yeah, so I wasn't suggesting which employee we didn't hire.
oh, okay, all right.
I was just saying, and the net assumption in 24 is 85,000 net of, revenue over cost. But in any event, I'm not saying which position, I'm just saying if the revenue can't be relied on, because it's one thing to estimate a revenue stream that we know. So it's one thing to say, well, I won't use property tax because it's highly likely, but even in our property tax estimate that they've given us, they've assumed a certain amount of new construction. Fine, they have basis for that. They know what our experience is. They're looking at numbers, so that they're making reasonable estimates. However, to make an estimate for what this revenue manager might bring in, we have no idea. That's why they used a method, well, 1.5, knock wood. I think that easily could be a number far less than 1.5. It could be a number far less than 1.0. So this is always, there's a reason we don't have that position right now, which is it's hard to figure out if this position is going to pay for itself. I think what the administration is saying, hey, there's enough, we're seeing enough that we think that we ought to go after this. But I would say to gamble on the revenue and hire other employees beyond just the employee that would go after this, to hire other employees on the basis that we think this person will generate enough money to pay their salaries when we have no idea if that will happen. We have no basis to, I think we've got to wait until that revenue is coming in before we do that. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to pay the employees. We're not, well, let's not say it that way. We're not going to have the revenue to cover that cost of adding those employees. So we're talking about an 8% increase in our spending. So we're gambling on an 8 or 9% increase in revenue. I don't like gambling on revenue that we don't know. So the GEMT, this is well thought out. We heard that every city except 2 cities is doing this. So this is highly thought out. I'm all fine. Let's put that in the budget. We can go get it. They don't plan to get it in a day. They're saying it's not going to come until 24. Great. They've left time to do it. That makes sense to me. But some of these others, I think they're assuming that we're going to be willing to pass tax increases that I don't think anyone's sitting here right now, or fee increases. Show me the fee schedule. Are you really willing to do those fee increases? Well, we don't have it yet. So we don't even know what the study is going to say. We know that we've undercharged, but are we willing to actually go and pass those increases? Because if not, we're going to have hired people and we're not going to have any way to pay them. Or to put it another way, we're going to back ourselves into a corner where we have to pass massive fee increases because we already hired the person. I think it's a mistake. Wait till we have the fees, then hire them for these expenses that we can't, for these revenues that we really don't have a basis to forecast. And my count is that's about 450,000. So I'm not saying which positions we cut, that because the 450,000 doesn't change just because I really want another position. Because by the way, I really want some of these positions that are proposed. But if we can't afford it, then let's start with that. And then let's say, okay, what can we afford? Now we figure out which of these positions we prioritize them. That's how I think we approach this. But I don't think we should count that 450.
So Director Ferguson? Do you have any comments regarding the revenue manager? I know you've studied this and know that this person will be bringing in additional revenue. Do you think that revenue would reach 450 by between 2023 and 2024? Maybe if you have some examples.
Well, that's like, thank you, Mayor. That's like Budget Manager Boutte indicated, is that we know that the B&O taxes are on the honor system. And there's 2 different revenue sources: business licenses and B&O taxes. So when I'm been having conversations with other cities, when they what they indicated was that when they had shifted to utilizing the state's business licensing portal to apply for licenses, that their business licensing revenues doubled. And so that has been an interesting conversation to have with cities who have changed with how they offer up that portal for business licensing. Now, that being said, with B&O taxes, and then they were then finding that, there were folks who should have been obtaining a business license, and then therefore they should have been obtaining a B&O, paying their B&O taxes. And so that's where we have some level of confidence that we would see a substantial increase in the B&O tax revenues. Does that help to answer the question? With regards to the revenue manager, we've identified some of those roles that this position would play, and that is certainly with on the revenue side, it's our business licensing revenues, it's our B&O tax revenues, it's our other tax programs such as admissions tax, gambling tax. It's assistance with the accounts receivable and ensuring that we are following through with our contracts and agreements and collecting all money, billing in a timely manner, monitoring those billings to ensure that we are being paid. The other role that this position is intended to oversee from an operations standpoint is our grants revenue. That is an ongoing sources of revenue that we see to help support our capital investments. And so that is another gap that from assessing where are we missing in the finance team, this position and all of those activities that the position would handle are places that we do see gaps in levels of service. So that's what I would offer up with regards to that particular new position.
Great, thank you. Councilor Watton?
Would it be possible to tie this new position of revenue manager to performance-based outcome? And I guess that's a question for Mr. Sturbank. Are we precluded from tying that into performance management of that individual in that role in terms of the new revenues generated?
Well, your question raises some separation of powers concerns as between the mayor and administration and the council. It's certainly something that the mayor or city administrator could establish with that person and work with them going forward. It'd be difficult, I think, for the council to impose that or manage it. Maybe that's a question for the council, at the mid-biennium or other budget to look at, to revisit this question. Maybe I'm not understanding your question fully.
I think the concern is that we hire this person at X dollars and they're going to bring in 1.5 of that cost in new revenue sources. And if they fail to do so, is there a safety valve for, year one of the council saying, okay, we are eliminating this position?
So the council makes compensation appropriations every budget. And you make it every biennially, and you have an opportunity to adjust that. And the pay classification for the employees is set out, in the budget. It's required to be. And so you always have the ability to choose which positions you fund and which ones you don't fund.
Thank you.
Councilor Holloway?
Okay, so B&O sales tax is $4 million revenue a year. If I grossly assume 50% of that is B&O, which is a gross assumption, it's not 50%. That means that revenue manager will have to increase the B&O revenues by 13% above and beyond what we have today each year in the biennium. Okay, to make those numbers. I'm not sure that's a reasonable expectation, considering that, again, 50% is a gross overstatement of the percentage of B&O and compared to sales tax. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes, it is a gross.
The other part, when we, guys, when you talk about, we can make sure we're getting what we are already owing in these other contract fees and everything else. Tell me we're not, because if we're not, we got a real issue. I think we're already doing that. Okay, so I can't take that into this role here. If you tell me it's increase in admission fees, 100% increase of a really small number, so small that it really doesn't get talked about in the document, does not get me excited. Okay, but what I proposed for you before, to what Mr. Watson was saying is, if you think I'm wrong, make it a contract position. It can prove itself out as a contract position. If it doesn't, no foul. If it does, we may consider in the mid biennial or next biennial to make it a permanent position. But I don't see the benefit here solid enough for me to make a recurring expense agreement here. It's a non-recurring statement of work, should be a non-recurring expense. That would be a contract employee. If you really want to go for it. I'm done.
Mayor Pro Tem Mayhew.
Yes, I agree with those comments, but I just want to point out my comments had nothing to do with the position. Somehow my comments have been morphed into some other thing. I agree with these comments about the position. I'm not opposed to the position if we can afford it. I love these ideas of making it some form of contract and sort of basis, contract and performance feature to it. And let's figure out if it pays for itself or not. I love all those ideas. My point was, let's not fund other positions beyond that by assuming the revenue and then appropriating additional positions and funding for those additional positions, betting that this is going to pay off. Let's wait and see. I'm not speaking against trying it. I'm speaking against assuming the revenue from it to pay for other things. That's what I'm speaking about.
That makes sense.
All right, well, I'll just add a couple comments on top of that for the most part. It sounds like potential suggestion coming from over here is kind of like a term limited position for the most part regarding this revenue manager, such as a 2-year term limited position. We'd revisit it before the next biennium. For example, if we wanted to make it permanent or not.
I think we're agreeing. I just don't know what the definition of
Right.
term limited is in my head.
That's how we
contract
use
employee.
that term, right, internally, but at Boeing, it's probably contract, right? In addition to that, we can go back to the list eventually and kind of show what are all the major changes and additions, right? There's actually not a lot of positions that we're proposing necessarily as a part of the general fund. It's pretty much, I believe, 2 right at this point. And there's other positions like the IT manager that requires a cost allocation in order to charge for that. But it's the 2 large ones are the revenue manager and the budget analyst, right, for the most part. There's also some changes, a little change with police with taking a detective position and changing that into administrative sergeant position. There's some additional changes in CD, relatively small in comparison to the budget analyst and the revenue manager. But we may also want to maybe bring back a list of positions that are currently open, right, at the city as well. Because of those open positions, that could be a part of the conversation overall, where you're trading, say, revenue manager for something else inside the general fund. So if that's important to council, I think we can bring that forward at the next.
Okay, say everything that you said.
Mayor Pro Tem Mayhew.
Yeah, so I think the difference between a contract position is that that's not an employee. That's a contractor who signs a contract with us to do something. They're not our employee. I think a term limited employee is an employee. So those are, I think that's the difference, but anyway, they'll tell us.
I don't know if there's term limited employees.
So they'll tell us.
Okay.
So I wanted to bring up a couple things. One is,
So I do have a question for everyone. So it's almost 7:10. Are we going to have an executive session? If so, we need to move into that because we have to be out of here by like 7:25. So you have to decide that. Or if we want to continue your comments. Councilor Johnson?
as much as I really want to get into that conversation because it's super critical, I'm not sure that we have the time tonight to give that topic that I think it is the time that it needs.
Right, okay. Mayor Pro Tem Mayhew?
Is it possible for us to move our executive session to a different room, giving up this room, but still continue into the executive session?
Yes, because I think our other council member has hopped off.
And there's no action required afterwards, so.
Right, that's correct.
So
Meeting scheduled 7:30.
Yeah. We have to decide if we want to extend it past 7:30 then at that point.
Somebody should.
So either we go do that or I bring up other points. It's up to you guys.
Council, is a motion to first go into executive session and then also extend the meeting because it will be longer than 7:30.
So move.
I'm not making the motion. That's your motion? And who?
What was the motion?
To go into executive session.
Oh, wait, what you said and what she said are slightly different.
And then you have to
Make a motion. You can't just
also
repeat whatever.
What's your motion?
extend it past 7:30 because we'll take longer. So that's,
I move that we go into special session for 40 minutes.
We're in special session.
I mean.
A closed
into a
session.
Closed session for 40 minutes.
Wanted to do something else.
so the motion dies, lack of a second. Councilmember Benson,
I'd like to move that we continue this meeting to 7:30, then go to executive session until 8.
Second.
this moved by
I got a
Councilmember
sick kid at home. I'm supposed to go pick up some medicine.
Benson and
Oh, yeah,
second by Mayor Pro Tem Mayhew to, we were actually need to go to like 7:25.
That
We
one.
need to clear the room. And then go into executive session till 8 at the latest. Any discussion? Councilor Say,
I'm 100% opposed to that. Every time I go to executive session, it takes 3 times longer than it should. We can talk about this another time. I don't see why we have to go to executive session to say we don't want to do take-home vehicles for the police and let them negotiate it in the next contract. So there's my statement, and I'm voting no. And then I may have to leave. I have a sick kid at home that needs me to pick up some medication. So you probably won't get me for that. So I'm just going to announce it now.
and it's more than just what you mentioned, but if I think, correct, we may need more time than what we're talking about. So
We always need more time.
that is true. Oh, is that a hand up?
Yeah.
Okay, Councilor Holloway.
Well, I guess I'm not 100%, but I somewhat second, Mr. Lissay. I think you guys know what you need to do. I think there's important discussions of what do we do about, we're gonna take $250,000 in revenue out per year, how we're gonna handle that. You can propose that you're gonna go off and do homework and come back with an answer, or we can have a discussion, and I'm more than willing to start recommending things to take out to make the 250 up. Okay, again, I don't see the need for executive session. I think we ought to close in on this 250 question and then call it a night.
I'm not sure where the 250 is coming from.
Me neither.
I don't think, we don't know where the 250 was the revenue assumption for the BNO manager. Pro Tim's suggestion was, let's not assume that revenue until we can prove it out. Therefore, we need to take 250K out of revenue. We take revenue out, we got to take expenses out. And what expenses are we going to take to match up to that 250?
That's two people that have mentioned it.
Okay.
We're not sure that everyone else agrees. Councilor Benson.
Yeah, I don't know what he's talking about. I have a motion on the table.
Okay, so Councilor Johnson.
I think with regard to the police take-home vehicles, I think that over the course of time, the opinions of the council have been shared. And I think that the administration could do what they will with that information. But also, I'm interested in what the other item is that may or may not be related. That said, I think that unless the city attorney says that that is time sensitive, that I would also be opposed to the motion. So I'm just curious from the city attorney if this is a time sensitive matter, apart from.
So
that,
no,
but-
no separate matter. It's some of the prior comments raised questions or issues with labor negotiations generally, which is that aspect is appropriate for the closed session. If you're just talking about the straight up budget decision, as I think Councilmember Lassay framed it, that's, yes, obviously the council can just discuss that policy choice, provide direction in this forum without going to closed session, but there isn't a separate legal topic.
Okay,
Other than
thank you.
that. What's
Yeah, well then in that case, yeah, I'd be opposed to the motion.
Okay. So motion is to go until 7:25 and executive session until 8 PM. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay.
Nay.
Okay, so there's 5 nay and 1 for Councilor Benson. And Councilor Christensen is no longer online.
I voted for it.
Mayor Pro Tem Mayhew.
Yeah, so I'm worried about time. Because we don't have time, I'll just tell you, I'm worried that the one-time list should include costs, additional unexpected costs that came up due to COVID for acquiring a fire truck. I think the timing, I'm not talking about a ladder truck, I'm talking about a replacement fire truck. I think there's something very urgent we have to do now, because the lead times on this, I believe, are something like 2 years to get this fire truck. We assumed a different lead time. There's new information. Also, the cost has gone up dramatically because of COVID. I think this is something, funding that needs to be considered for the one-time expenditures. I also think that I need to understand better what's going on in the utility funds. We voted to change things in the utility fund with the intention that the additional money would be used to buy trees. We have an enormous tree problem. We cannot pay for the replacement trees. We put something in place last biennium. Now that money is not appear like it's going to be used for trees, but rather to hire more employees. So when are the trees going to get addressed? So I don't understand that. I just need to understand what our plan is there. So those seem to me like major things that I need to understand before I can sort of have a point of view on the budget. I think what was being referred to earlier was 250 a year, which would be 500 for me. I had 450, 500. We're talking about the same number, I think, that needs to come out of revenue. So those are a couple of things that I need to understand, but I think the executive session was to talk about, in essence, what are our assumptions about pay for our staff, some of which are unionized and some of which are not. But I think we've got to understand that I'm very worried that the amount that's in this budget for pay is not enough, which means if we pass a budget with not enough money to pay our staff, we're going to really be, and then we go out and hire more staff. They're going to be a real fix. And lastly, the one thing I don't understand is why there isn't a proposal for more police officers. We have crime spinning up. We have complete inability to control speed on the parkway. I'm very worried that our police department needs more officers and that we should talk about that. So those are kind of my set of things beyond what's in here, which is, okay, there's a bunch of proposals from the mayor's budget that we're going to need to consider. So I think all of those things in my mind have to be addressed before we get to the end. I'm worried about when, because I know you all might have different thoughts as well. So we're running out of time. And so I think both in this meeting, but generally, I think I just want to understand, when are we going to have time to continue our debate and get to the bottom of these decisions so that we can pass a budget on time? Because I sure don't want to be here on Christmas. So maybe we could ask for someone to tell us when our next opportunities to discuss this are, and maybe we could decide we need to add some more time.
So we do have a November.
We have 2 meetings scheduled next week, an hour before the regular council meeting and then the Tuesday after the council meeting.
So we have,
So yeah, there's a 3 hours.
Yeah,
Next week.
It's the Tuesday is a 3-hour meeting.
So it's 4 hours total next week.
So we've got-
Besides what happens in the council meeting, that'll be additional time.
and that's just for budget.
Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you. I'd lost track of that.
I wanted to see you propose another meeting.
So, but I think, so you're bringing different things up, but I'm not sure that everyone has voted or agreed with it. These are just your ideas.
Correct.
And so there's a list.
Could we
Councilor Watt.
do a quick round robin?
Yes.
Just summary from each one of the council members.
That sounds good. Counselor Benson?
That all sounds reasonable to me. I'd love to talk about that more. The only thing I'd say is next Tuesday, I am going to have to leave at 7:45. Unfortunately, I won't be able to stay till 9.
Counselor Watton?
I totally agree about the priority of public safety. Just a little bit concerned about the idea of adding more officers. I totally get where you're coming from.
I kind of get where you're coming from.
Counselor Holloway?
Or thought we were doing.
Yeah, I'm done.
Okay.
Thank you.
I kind of get where you were coming from. If Chief had asked for more officers, if he's got what he needs, or at least budget wise. So I need to hear that conversation. I haven't heard an issue. I hear anecdotal and piece that Parkway needs attention. But I'm not aware of a massive crime wave.
Venus report.
Okay.
It's in the monthly reports.
Okay, just haven't heard it come up through committee that we need to staff up.
And maybe we don't, but I'd just like to discuss it.
I'm done.
And but you also had a comment earlier about waste management. So what is the impact of waste management and the percent increase?
So we assume a
That would be
10%
something on-
administrative fee on top of the waste management contract. Can we provide the community some relief by not taking that 10%, but taking 6, 8, 9.5?
And it's policy because now you're giving up revenues. So the rest of the council would need to decide whether that's what they want to do or not.
Piece, but at the beginning of that contract, I was here, that there was an assumption the administrative fee could be used to offset some of those increases that were coming. And I just want to make sure that question gets asked again. Do we want to take that opportunity?
We are, Mayor Pro Tem Mayhew, you've already given your list. So Councilor Lissay?
Yeah, I agree with the Mayor Pro Tem's items, especially relating to the idea of spending money before we have it. We need to find the funds, resources and the revenue sources, and then appropriate either the staff member, the action, the allocation. I think there's a number of those things that kind of just continue to come up. I fully trust in the chief and his ability to police our city. And if he feels he needs something to take care of these issues that he has in his reports, I think he'll ask for it. It may just be a matter of him having the staff members he's asked for, and then having the numbers in place, and then the ones that have been already, we got to remember, we haven't caught up yet to what he's asked for previously. So once that happens, I'm hopeful that's there. And I'll shorten all this. There's a few things I do want to ask about. I've been spending most of the time. I wanted to listen to everybody because this is complicated stuff for me. Drew, if you could put on your list of questions, I'm struggling to figure out how to find where the intergovernmental revenues of $8.5 million in the 2023 non-utilities capital fund are coming from. I can't figure out where that is and what that is. So if you could answer that question for the next meeting, I won't put you on the spot. I also am struggling with the general philosophy of that we're doing a 9.7 increase in operating expenditures when we've started this meeting with the idea that we're having a looming recession and we'll have difficulty obtaining revenues. Why are we increasing our spending by 9.7% when we know there's going to be problems? So I think that's tells you where I stand in terms of the budget, in terms of all the increases.
Councilor Johnson?
All right. I wasn't aware of the tree appropriation issue, so I didn't know to bring it up in Parks and Public Works. So I'm really glad to know about that. So now I know how to ask about it. And then, because maybe there is an answer over there. Also interested in the expected increase in cost of living adjustments, whether those were appropriate or not. And if they are on the lower side, is that realistic with the climate we're currently in? I'm interested in seeing if the administration can come back with a proposal for 450-ish thousand in savings from somewhere and maybe just leave it up to them. I don't know if that has to be FTE or if they have something else in mind. But whatever that would be. And then finally, I think that our programs, if we're going to have them, just seem to me like they should have recurring revenue. So I just think that we might want to reconsider that element.
Okay. And you mentioned also take home cars. And so is that going to be part of executive session next time? Or is there are you making a proposal?
I think that it sounds like there might be a broader salary discussion. So it might be necessary to have an executive session next time, and perhaps we could address it there. If we're going to be talking about salaries, and that could be something that is part of salaries, I believe, from our training. So we can talk about more there.
Right. All right. Any other comments? Otherwise, we will need to adjourn. Mayor Pro Tem Mayhew?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Mayor Pro Tem Mayhew and second by Councilmember Holloway to adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Nay. Thank you, everyone.
Don't trust it.